All right. So done a lot of good work. Love your lucid chart. Looks
Yeah,
amazing.
I saw you doing it on the video, and I was like, let me give this a shot. And I
Yeah,
thought
it looks
you
really
might be
good.
able to use it.
Definitely. Very helpful. All right, let me share my screen and let's get on the same page here. Okay, so I actually found this post on your family project page that looks like, did you make this chart or did Steve post this?
So Steve started the chart, and I actually contacted him and gave him there's Miles. You can see that's my line.
Yeah.
And I actually, so over here, I talked to Joseph G. Over here on the left.
Yeah.
And I actually contacted Steve to tell him that he was a descendant of Elijah. So I fixed that. And this Oliver Keys that you see I guess he changed. So apparently the research that was done, he changed his name during the or after the War of 1812 because there was a family dispute. But the research that I found was that he actually deserted the War of 1812, and I think he ran to Pennsylvania. And I actually found a newspaper article. So for a long time, I thought that David could have been the father of Miles. And I actually disproved that because I found a newspaper article showing them looking for Oliver Hayden, who was born in Farmington in 1786. And if you look at the 1790 census record of David in Farmington, he only has one son, and it's got to be Oliver. So I ruled out David.
Okay.
But so the David Sr. here, just above Elijah, he had another son, Alan, and I believe could be Miles's father. And with a recent DNA connection, because Miles shows up around the same time as these other Haydens in Onondaga County, where I'm from in New York. But I have found no document putting these guys together, which is very, very frustrating because they're all there. They're living near each other. The youngest son, Alan Jr., was living in Cicero with Miles and in Clay. He's living next to Miles's children. So the pieces are all there, but the evidence is not. Now, Alan did not leave a will. He was a Revolutionary War soldier. He did leave a pension, but in the pension, he doesn't state his children. So yeah, there's just nothing there that I've found linking Miles to Alan. But the DNA match that I had with Victoria shows that we share 61 centimorgans at a 4th to 6th cousin distance, and we would be exactly 6 cousins from what I looked at. And with the Y DNA matches, it seems that I have 3 cousins on the David Hayden line. So in the lucid chart, there's a thing in there for the through lines. It's down on the bottom tabs. I think it's like so that Jemima Ellsworth is the wife of David Hayden, who was the father of this Oliver Keys. So DNA through lines at least puts me into this. They think that this is possible as well. But obviously this is very distant. But all 3 of these are female descendants. So that could be throwing the DNA off a little bit too. What I thought is that, if Alan is my guy and Victoria and I match pretty highly, at a 4th to 6th cousin distance. Now I've reached out for other Alan Hayden descendants, but none of them are willing to DNA test, and it's very frustrating. They're sort of like really against it. So I've not had another person from the Allen Hayden line besides Victoria been able to test. But at 99%, Daniel Hayden, we all share.
Yeah.
So that's obvious.
Yep.
But I just have a feeling that it's this David Hayden line that I'm connected to. So what's interesting though is I don't know if the steps mean like close distance, like if I'm closerly, more closely matched with the Samuel Hayden line. Because a while back I did find something interesting. There was a 1799 tax record for a Samuel Hayden that was living in the town of Onondaga. And the reason why I think that's significant is because Miles has a connection to the town of Onondaga. There's no doubt. So there was a payment, a War of 1812 militia roll that he is on, and he's actually serving under a guy named Pulaski King, who was the commander of this militia regiment. And Pulaski King just so happens to be from Harwington, Connecticut, the same place Allen is from. And the spelling on the card is the same way as the Heydon, as Allen spells it. So that's what makes me think that Miles, on all of his son's records, they say he's from Connecticut. He said he was from Connecticut. I have this sort of connection to Harwington, Connecticut, through relationship. But again, this is all piecing it together. What's interesting is I found a later newspaper article in 1872, I believe, that shows that Allen Hayden Sr. also went to the same conflict as Miles in 1813 at Fort Ontario, or also known as Fort Oswego, during the War of 1812, which is also really interesting because his other sons served in a different regiment, but they all responded to this call at Fort Oswego in June of 1813, which could be nothing. I mean, I've definitely linked them to the same event. But other than that, I mean, land records, nothing. Miles is not selling any other land to the Haydens in Onondaga, at least. So it just seems like it would be Allen, but I'm not sure. What do you think?
Well, let's talk about what the DNA can and can't tell you here. So I tried to map out your mutations. So if we look at this nice big chart here, you can see this table does identify these mutations in the pink or the purple, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I basically consolidated all of that just into this Excel spreadsheet. So you've got the individuals that you match that are definitely related to you, probably in exactly the way you're saying, like, you definitely all connect back at your initial common ancestor. But again, how does everybody relate below that? That's the trick, right? So in general, what we look for are shared mutations. And you can see that you and that Bruce, which is this guy, right? This guy, that you do share a mutation. Now, in general, we like to limit the number of times a mutation happens. So ideally, the mutation happens somewhere between Daniel and Samuel, or Samuel and his son, and then Miles slips right into here, and everybody shares that mutation, and that says that Miles should be somewhere over in Samuel's line. Now, with just one mutation, mutations are funny. They can happen anytime. It's not like ironclad proof or anything like that. And your line still does have these, 3 mutations after that point, and his line still has 1. And so if you think about it this way, if they share this mutation, this essentially 14 to 15 that's happening right here, okay, if they share that, let's say that's between Daniel and Samuel. Okay, between Daniel and Samuel, this 1 mutation happens, 14 to 15. Samuel now has the 15. He's going to pass it down to all of his descendants. Now, this would be pretty easy to test, actually, if you could find another descendant of Samuel to test. So you said descendants of Allen don't want to test, but could there be another descendant of Samuel to test? If that person also has the 15, like, that's pretty good evidence that that is when this mutation happened between Daniel and Samuel, 14 to 15, meaning all of Samuel's descendants have a 15. Okay,
Right.
so that would be really helpful to try to find that. But even then between Samuel and the present, on your line and on this line, so between Samuel and Bruce, there has to be one mutation. He's got this 11 to 12 mutation right here that's happened, and you've got 3. So in the same span of time between Samuel and the present, you know, going past Miles down to you, we now have to have 3 mutations. Not impossible, not ideal. Again, anybody in your line, like if you could find another descendant of Miles, a direct male descendant of Miles to take a test, this would be so helpful because it's going to help pin down when did these mutations happen. If Miles didn't have any of those mutations and somehow they've all happened between Miles and you, that tells us something really big. But if Miles had all 3 of these mutations, then it's very unlikely that he could sit in here at this line, because then all 3 mutations would have to happen between Samuel and Miles, which would be very unlikely. Do you see what I mean? Do you see how by just testing a couple more people, we can try to pin down when these Y mutations happened in this tree, and thus help us better figure out when these lines got together?
Okay. Yeah. So you mean like why they would have to Y DNA test?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I had my father and my brother test on Ancestry. I have not had my dad do a Y DNA test.
Well, his test theoretically should be the same as yours.
Yeah,
you know, obviously father to son mutations can happen, but they technically should be the same. I want someone much further back. I want you to go all the way back to Miles and find, did Miles have more than one son, that we could find another descendant of Miles that's not from the same son as your line?
So in my line, so Miles' son Parker, that's my line.
Right.
Now, you would need somebody from a different son of Miles, though, right?
Yeah. Parker's brother.
So from what I've gathered, now I don't know if there's any other male descendants. I've done extensive research. So he had a son, Carlton, single, never married, died in North Dakota. Ephraim was a Civil War soldier. He moved out to Wisconsin. Those lines ended up with no male descendants, and I believe the last male descendant died in the 1990s.
Okay.
So Miles's first son, Leonard, he had 2 sons. Now I was unable to, I don't know if, so Leonard had a son, George. I'd have to look at it again, but I've been unable to find Albert and what happened to him. Now that could be something I could pursue. Now the other, so he did have a daughter, but she died in 1868. So she did have some, but they're not, I don't know if they'd be considered, would they be okay? Well, no, because you would need a male, like a male
Right.
one. So
Yeah.
I don't know if, I mean, I can search around. I think Leonard might be the best.
So that's like your first strike, first avenue of research: descendants of Miles, descendants of Samuel.
Mhm.
Either one, both would be ideal, right? And get another, essentially it's like a testimony, right? You represent one testimony of what the Y DNA of Miles actually looked like. We just
Right.
need another person to help us prove that and to help us see when exactly did these mutations happen, which can better help us figure out relationships. Okay, so Miles for sure, any descendants you can find of him, it sounds like it's going to be tough and you might strike out. Going to Samuel's line, maybe finding other descendants on Samuel's line, that would also be helpful.
I did, so there is one, we matched on Ancestry, and I mapped him out. If you go to the Lucid chart, John, so it's like Ancestry matches or Ancestry DNA. I think it's down there. Yeah. So John is a descendant of Samuel. But
I would love for John to take a Y DNA test.
So I So I think there's a bit of drama going on in that line, but so essentially, so John's brother tested, and because he's adopted, but he is a Hayden, essentially adopted into the family, and I asked John if he would be willing to take another test, and I have sort of lost the adopted brother's information. So I could research that line and try to find any more living descendants within that somewhere.
Yeah.
Somebody
So
that
is
wanted
this so this Samuel here is the one that's right here?
Yes.
Or right here,
Yep.
right?
The
Okay, so
1707.
this person, yeah, this person here is different than this person, right?
So that's what I wanted to ask you about. So it's really interesting because this Samuel here, the 1748, he was a
Yeah.
Revolutionary War soldier. So that Samuel line of the family moved to Conway, Massachusetts. And there you can see them there in the census, and they have lots of males old enough to be Miles. But what's interesting is I got the will for the 1707 to 1777 Samuel, and he doesn't mention another son Samuel. But what's really interesting is that in the 1810 census of Barkhamsted, where that Samuel's living, the 1748 census, there's another Samuel living there, old, just as old as that Samuel. So it seems to me that Samuel may have not died. As the will doesn't show him, but there was a genealogy written that said he died in early on. So
yeah. So yeah, so Y DNA is going to help us a little bit. It just can't be very precise about relationships. It's just not able to. The most precise you're going to get is if you do big Y. So I do think that having all of you tested on big Y would be amazing and could really help you sort out these relationships, but that's expensive, so it's kind of like you can kind of weigh the cost of like you spending time trying to find a descendant, asking them, testing them at 67 or 111, or taking that time and money and investing it in big Y. Because even if just you and Bruce take big Y, and I would advise if you're going to do big Y, just have your dad do it, because that does eliminate that one chance of mutation between you and him. So have your dad take big Y, have Bruce take big Y. Big Y is much better at refining relationships and helping us distinguish relationships. And so that would be a really good next step. So
Bruce has recently passed away, but I contacted his family, and I was able to ask them to upgrade to the Y111, and I actually paid for it, and they did it. So I don't think they would be opposed to doing the Y111 or the big Y. So do you think it would? My question is, do you think it would be more beneficial for me to upgrade to the Y or the big Y, both of us, Bruce and myself, and see where that goes? I mean, I can try to track
that would be really beneficial. I do. I think it'd be really beneficial.
So what you're saying is you think I'm a closer match with the Samuel line? I guess that's my question. Then my question.
Maybe. I mean, there's one. This is all that's telling us that. That's it. Shared 15. And is that shared because of a shared ancestor before you share with everybody else? Maybe. Or is it an independent mutation? And that's what we're really asking.
Yeah.
And so the big Y is going to give us all this more data that will give us more of an indication of what's going on here. I mean, ideally you'd get 3, right? You and Bruce and one of these other guys, I don't know, Joseph or John, it doesn't really matter, since we know how they're related to the family. It doesn't matter who tests. But if 3 of you could, then you can really see, again, if you are sharing more similarities with this descendant of Samuel than you are with the other people. That's really what it comes down to. Because if we didn't have this shared mutation, there would be nothing. There'd be nothing to tell us who you're more closely linked to. So this is our only little bit, and we're not sure what it means. We need more data. So
Okay.
But that's the Y DNA. And before we run out of time, I want to make sure we address the autosomal DNA. So when you're seeing an autosomal DNA match like these, like you said, these are really small matches. In general, I don't like to use autosomal DNA to find an ancestor more distant than a 3 times great grandparent. So you're going way beyond, you're asking autosomal DNA to go way beyond what I traditionally recommend that it does. It's just so hard to tell if the DNA that you're sharing is because of this one person or because of the billions of other people you've got connecting. I mean, so at the 3 times great grandparent level, you have 32 3 times great grandparent couples, 32. And that's at 3 times great. At 4 times great, you have 64, right? 5 times great, you know, if we get back to this 5 times great grandparent couple, you've got over 100 couples, right? And so it's like with Deborah and Teresa and Judy, is this your only shared ancestor out of all 100?
Yeah, that's the question.
It's so hard to know, right? Like it's impossible to know. So yeah, it looks nice when Throughline gathers them all together for you, but this doesn't prove anything. And it really, it's not evidence. Okay. So one of the things you could start doing with autosomal that would just kind of solidify your connection back to your ancestors that you already know. So we're really, you know, dealing with Parker and Permelia here, right? So this is your dad. So people related to his grandparents are first cousins. Then we've got second cousins and third cousins. So these Miles and Belinda are the 3 times great grandparents. Like this is as far back as I would recommend using autosomal DNA. So you can use it to help you like solidify relationships back this far. You can prove your connections back to Miles and Belinda and like be really confident in all the people that you have in your tree using autosomal DNA. But if you feel like that's a waste of your time because you feel like the paper records are so good, then they are. And I don't think autosomal DNA is really going to lead you down any really, really productive paths for this particular question. So one thing I did notice as I was looking at the autosomal DNA is like what I did is I went into the through lines and I started to try to create groups of matches that corresponded to the specific lines we were interested in looking at. And so the way that I do it, again, if we're looking, and I should put this pedigree back in here so we can find it. So we don't want the Brooks, how do you say this one? Crowbar?
I have no clue.
All right, we're going to say Croba. Okay, so we want matches that have to do with the paternal side of your dad's family, but we don't want the Brooks Croba line.
Right.
Okay, so essentially, through lines, this is our Brooks, right? You've got a lot of descendants here.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing you do is take these descendants and decide, is the relationship that's listed the right relationship? Like, so Throughline says that this person should be your second cousin once removed. So you click on this total amount of shared DNA and it brings up these relationships and it says second cousin once removed, top tier, 50% likely, great. Okay, it means that, you know, as you do this over time, like this one's second cousin twice removed. So again, we see that right here on top. That's what we like to see. And so this like helps you, like if you go through each of these matches and you're like, okay, this is really good. This helps me see that I'm connected to this Brooks Crowbar line. And it can help you like just gather matches from this line. So what I did is I clicked on this person and you can see that I've made this little note for you right here that says I used shared matches on this person to label everybody as this Brooks Crowbar line. So what I did is I created this Brooks Crowbar group in purple, and then I used shared matches, and then everybody on this list got a purple dot. Everybody gets one, no exceptions, okay? And then I did that with a few of those other matches. So again, we're creating this group of people that's connected to just this line of your family, just Brooks Crowbar. So that's everybody going over here. Okay. So I added to your lucid chart over here too, just for fun. So that Brooks Crowbar, now all those people have a purple dot. They're going to be related to all of these couples. There's lots of them. Okay. So similarly, we made this little Hayden gold blue. So I found some matches that were Hayden gold, used shared matches on them, and they're all this, it's actually a really dark blue. but it's too hard to read if I make it dark on here. Okay. And then I looked inside that group. You don't have matches that are descendants from these other lines. So like we go back to through lines. So there's our Hayden gold line on the 2 times greats. In the 3 times greats from Miles and Belinda, you don't have any matches. Like there's no one who's their descendant through Parker's siblings. So we can't do the same thing. We can't find these matches who would be 3rd cousins, or I'm sorry, who would be 4th cousins, and use their shared matches to like gather matches that have to do with Miles and his wife, because there aren't any. So we're kind of left with just groups of people. But again, like by doing this, like what I'm kind of getting at is that you have these matches that you feel like are kind of maybe connected to this family. So matches that are under 20 centimorgans won't show up in shared matches, but you can kind of look around. Like if you clicked on one of these, like Deborah Anderson, and used shared matches, you just want to make sure that at least she's kind of sorting with the people who are sorting to this side of your family, right? If Deborah Anderson is matching with a bunch of people on your dad's mom's side, then we know that this definitely is not working.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's not perfect, but it is a way that if you wanted to use these smaller matches, you could at least, the process to me is you group all the matches that you can group. And then you see if these smaller matches are sharing DNA with anybody that you've already grouped. And just to give yourself confidence, they should all share with people who group together with this side of your family and not other sides. So that's the best you can do with autosomal DNA when you're kind of looking this far back, is just create your groups and then see if these small matches maybe have something in common, but it's hard because shared matches doesn't go down that far. You know, it's just hard. It's really, I don't know if it's worth your time. I just wanted to kind of
it doesn't
walk you
seem
through.
like it would be very fruitful.
So it can be. I mean, this is the way you find missing 3 times great grandparents or closer, is by, you know, creating all of these groups and then diving into these groups.
Yeah.
One thing I did see, go ahead.
Well, so I was just thinking, you know, for me, I mean, I'm back, you know, 5 generation, you know, I don't need to find a 3 times great or a 4 times great, because I've already done there. Now my mother's
You've done the paper trail. Yeah.
I had lots of matches on my mother's line, which I'm just not really interested in right now. I'm interested in this Hayden line, but you know, so really, I mean, when we're talking about a 6th great grandfather, Y DNA is going to be the way to go. And I just I need to find another Samuel Hayden ancestor at the end of the day, besides Bruce. I mean, I could upgrade.
Find another Samuel. Ideally, you would find another of your line as well, another from Miles. You would do big Y. That's the best next steps if this is your passion and your goal. Y DNA is 100% the way to go. And the more people you can test who are known descendants of this family, the better off you're going to be. I mean, if you had 20 descendants of your guy, like, you know, if you had 20 descendants of this William Hayden, like this would be so much more clear. Yeah. Because the mutation patterns would come out so much stronger. And even if you just did them all at 111 and didn't do big Y and did a handful of big Y, like you could make a really, really strong, robust project out of this, but it's going to take a lot of money and it's going to take a lot of time. But that's how you figure this stuff out. Like I've worked with family projects who have 40 and 50 people who have tested, and the data is so rich and it tells such a strong story because it's so easy to see different lines and their mutations from each other because there's so many people. Yeah. But in this case, it's just like, oh, I don't know, is this trackable or traceable, or it's just harder. So the more people you can find on any of these lines, the better you're going to be. Yeah.
So, you know, considering there's really no way to tell at this point whether Miles is a descendant of the David Hayden or the Samuel Hayden line.
Right.
Now the tax record's always been interesting to me, and I thought that there was a connection to the town of Onondaga. That there's a Samuel Hayden listed there that seems out of the ordinary. And what even makes it even better is that there's another family that is living there, and in the tax record, in the census record, that goes back to the other Haydens in Conway, Massachusetts, in a place called Coolrain, which is just outside of Conway. So there's this other connection there that I thought, could point me towards.
And honestly, as many of those, Haydens that haven't been connected into this bigger branch, but are kind of like lurking around your people. Again, the more Y-DNA you can get from those people, the more you're going to be able to see if these lines are connected to yours or not, if it's coincidence that they share the same name or it's not. Y-DNA can answer those kinds of questions too. So you've got great research strategies. You've done a lot of really good work already. It's really just keep going. And Y-DNA is pretty much your only route. And it's not fantastic at telling the difference between relationships at a brother or uncle or first cousin level. So is there an answer in the DNA? Maybe, maybe not. But you just keep going. But like Y-DNA is the only route. So just keep going.
So, and just last question. So how significant is the mutation? Is that it's an indicator, at least, that's pointing me towards Samuel?
It is. So that particular marker, DYS 385, it's a relatively fast moving marker. So there's, some markers are really slow, and the slow moving ones are more likely to be ancestral, meaning happened back at Samuel. The faster moving ones, could it have happened twice in the last 5 or 6 generations? Yes. So it's so hard to know. Like, they have average mutation rates, but it could happen at the last generation, or it could happen 10 generations ago. And there really isn't a way to know until you test enough people, and then you can begin to see when they happened.
Okay.
So, all right, good luck. I'll
Yes.
send you a recording of this if you want to revisit it, but you're on the right track. Just keep going.
All right. Thank you.
All right, take care.
Yeah.
Bye.